Hello my dear friends and welcome back to another Star Wars video. It is I coming at you once again, your favourite galactic hostess, Star Wars Meg. And today we have a couple of very surprising, unexpected updates. We're going to begin with Star Wars movies and then we'll move on to the Acolyte. So no more jibber jabber, let's dive straight in. So, as I spoke about in my last video, the budget for The Mandalorian and Grogu has finally been revealed, and according to Collider.com, it's $166 million. Pretty low for a Star Wars movie, and fans were praising it, saying that a lower budget means high potential for a better return on investment. However, my dear friends, the initial number reported by Collider has now been debunked. Insider Jeff Snyder chimed in and gave us some clarity to the situation. And just keep in mind, he was the first person to tell us we were getting a Mando movie, so I would say I'm inclined to believe him. In conversation with John Rocker, Jeff Snyder says the budget is $320 million, double the initially reported figure. And when I covered the original story, I did add the caveat that when all is said and done, final budgets are often much higher than what was initially reported. So I guess Disney and Lucasfilm are taking a bigger risk. They're going to need a pretty significant box office to break even. The question is the interest there with the general audience? And what is the marketing campaign gonna look like? Moving on, my dear friends, The Acolyte. On June 17th, we're getting the visual guide, and a new preview has been released, with some brand new information for Qimir and May. And you might be saying, well Meg, didn't you really dislike this show? I did. But there is one thing I'm looking forward to with this book. Canon information about Darth Plagueis. Hopefully a long dedicated section with some expanded, first time ever, Disney canon info. When that drops, you can bet I will be covering it. But today, my dear friends, we have some insights about Qimir. Manny Jacinto's the stranger, and there are a couple of very juicy gems which suggest, just like his master Plagueis, he was also interested in immortality, Sith science, and chemistry. We knew he was able to cook up a poison, but they never explicitly tied it to Plagueis. Here's what it says. Shambling from place to place, with a disarming uncertainty and carelessness, Qimir is easy to underestimate. He divulges very little about his past, and appears to have no designs on the future, just living in a reckless present while trying to avoid scrutiny. The lack of responsibility is an illusion. It draws attention away from the fact he's in service to an unseen master. Qimir's latest ruse is as an apothecary on Olega. The real store owner's disappeared, and if queried about, Qimir rattles off a vague story about an extended trip to visit family. Even though the apothecary role seems improvised, it's also driven by one of Qimir's interests, his skill in chemistry and pharmaceuticals, indicating a deeper well of knowledge than his flippant attitude suggests. And some of what's on display at the apothecary shop ties into some of these scientific interests, including hydrating secretions, a rare fish-like creature whose fins secrete an oily serum that de-ages the skin, making you appear younger. And I wonder if Qimir had these interests when he was a Jedi, and that's the reason Darth Plagueis sought him out. His interest in chemistry and pharmaceuticals may have just been a gateway to something greater, and maybe Plagueis promised him something more, because as we know, Plagueis was obsessed with immortality. In the expanded universe, Anakin's conception was the product of the Force pushing back on some of Plagueis' experiments. In The Acolyte, many fans think Plagueis had a role in the conception of Osha and May, even though Leslye Headland denies it and says it's not explicitly the case. The show was meant to convey that Mother Anastasia manipulated the Force herself, but I wonder if this was part of a wider deal made with the Sith, if at some point Plagueis used the Brendok Coven, a mysterious group of Force users who honestly were a bit underwhelming. I have heard rumours in the original version of the show they were much more brutal and very different to what the final product gave us. There were rumours of some watering down of concepts in The Acolyte because they were too brutal for a Disney Plus show. Maybe he did have something to do with the twins. Remember what Palpatine later said? He was so powerful and so wise, he could even influence midichlorians to create life. And what would be so fascinating if they ever continued the story of Qimir and Plagueis is learning how far the obsession went. But considering we're not getting a season 2, maybe this book will shed some light on it. As Manny Jacinto said, Qimir isn't even his name. Is he Darth Venomous? In either case, I think it's a very interesting reveal that Qimir was into Sith science, and possibly Sith alchemy. In the mobile game Star Wars Commander, we learn that later in the timeline Palpatine had Sith scientists work on a project known as Blackwing. This was part of Palpatine's immortality research, and it resulted in a deadly virus. But much about what he learned originated with his master's interests, Darth Plagueis. But Palpatine isn't around yet during the Acolyte, so to what extent was Qimir interested in all this stuff? And now that he's got Osha, does he bring her to Plagueis to be studied? Is she an asset, not just as a Sith Acolyte, but also as a scientific project for Plagueis? I know the show tried to give us explanations of the magic done by Mother Anastasia, but it's far more interesting that it was a manipulation from Darth Plagueis, and that the Witch Coven made a deal with the Sith. We'll never know the full extent of it. Some other reveals include some species names, for example, this character, Mayo June, and he's of a species inspired by the Dug, like Sebulba from the Phantom Menace. Like I said, my dear friends, when the book comes out and we learn more about Darth Plagueis, I will be covering it. I do think it was such a waste. The character design looked really awesome, really terrifying and menacing, and I wish they'd done more with him. Nonetheless, moving on to our final topic. So this is a bit of a different kind of update. A couple of years ago when LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga came out, I made a bunch of videos with gameplay, with updates, with news. It was a really big moment for Star Wars video games, because if you're like me, you had memories of playing the early LEGO Star Wars games. Nonetheless, fans were hoping LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga was just a stepping stone. While it marked the only Star Wars LEGO game that included all three trilogies, fans were hoping there were more games to come, more spin-offs, maybe another LEGO Clone Wars game, maybe a LEGO Mandalorian game, instead of just the DLC packs. While some huge news coming out of LEGO seems to suggest that's not going to happen anytime soon. There were rumours, but now it's confirmed, LEGO is ditching TT games after 20 years. Due to record profits, their new initiative is to make their own in-house games, moving away from collaborations with Lord of the Rings, with Marvel, and with Star Wars. This basically means that any hopes for another LEGO Star Wars game anytime soon is very doubtful. Although LEGO refused to comment on what it meant for big IPs, like Star Wars. Speaking with the Financial Times, LEGO Chief Executive Niels Christensen said this: "We're building up to having our own development capabilities, and this negates needing to work with other studios. We're gonna start making our own games in-house, and it's going to be an interactive cross-platform initiative where the LEGO sets coexist with corresponding games. And considering they're going to prioritize profit, it's more likely they're going to make games based on their entirely original franchises." But like I said guys, this information is rather puzzling, because we don't know what this means in terms of LEGO's collaboration with Lucasfilm Games. It still could happen without Traveller's Tales, but who knows what the final product is going to be like. We could end up with a far inferior gaming experience. The TT logo in LEGO games is too iconic. You can understand why the LEGO Star Wars community is pretty upset about this. But some say it's a good thing. Some say it's a fresh start, especially those who didn't particularly like the Skywalker saga. It all depends on the licensing arrangement. It's also worth mentioning LEGO is also in business with Epic Games. Additionally, LEGO partnered with 2K for a racing game, 2023's LEGO 2K Drive. But there is no denying, if you're a fan of the LEGO Star Wars games, TT has been iconic.